Thanksgiving Day in 1900 was a moment for Americans to gather and celebrate family, gratitude, and tradition. In San Francisco, the day's festivities centered around one event, the big game, a highly anticipated football match between Stanford University's Cardinals and the California Golden Bears from University of California, Berkeley. Football was still in its infancy, a gritty and unregulated sport that drew passionate crowds despite its brutal nature. On November 29th, 19,000 fans filled the 16th Street grounds, the chosen venue for the game. Streets were alive with a buzz of spectators waving banners, singing school chants, and wearing their team's colors. For some, the $1 ticket price was an affordable entry into the action. For many others, however, that fee represented an impossible barrier. Among those excluded fans were working-class men and boys, who swarmed the area around the stadium looking for ways to catch a glimpse of the game. The rooftop of the nearby San Francisco and Pacific Glassworks factory offered an irresistible vantage point. What began as a day of camaraderie and competition would soon turn into the deadliest sports-related disaster in American history. The collapse of the glass factory's roof sent hundreds plummeting into a fiery hell below. Yet, over a century later, this tragedy remains largely forgotten, overshadowed by the very event it was tied to. I'm your host, Evan Woodard, and this is Deep Dive, the Thanksgiving Day disaster of 1900. The big game wasn't just a football match, it was a cultural event. Since its inception in 1892, the annual showdown between Stanford and Berkeley had captivated Northern California. By 1900, it had become a cherished Thanksgiving Day tradition. Fans weren't just rooting for their team, they were declaring an allegiance to a way of life. Stanford, the private institution known for being an academic powerhouse, carried an air of refinement. And Berkeley, California's premier public university, symbolized the determination of the working-class families striving for better opportunities. Local newspapers played a pivotal role in stoking the rivalry. Articles compared the team's strategies, profiled players, and described the game as a clash of titans. The stakes felt monumental not only for the athletes, but for their schools and supporters. A victory meant bragging rights would echo for an entire year. Football in 1900 was vastly different from the sport we know today. Protective gear was minimal, and injuries were not just frequent, but expected. Broken bones, concussions, and even fatalities were all too common. This high-stakes brutality only fueled the public's fascination. Watching a game was akin to witnessing a gladiator match, a test of raw strength and determination. By 2:30 p.m., the 16th and Folsom grounds were bursting with energy. The official seating capacity had been exceeded, with some fans cramming into standing room-only sections. Outside, those who couldn't afford a ticket searched desperately for a way to see the action. A nearby factory rooftop soon became the focal point of this unsanctioned viewing party. The San Francisco and Pacific Glassworks had just opened a new factory in the city's industrial district. Its rooftop was made of corrugated metal that was designed solely for ventilation. The factory housed massive furnaces that burned at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit and extreme heat that required constant airflow to prevent catastrophic overheating. The roof was never intended to bear weight, let alone hold a crowd. On Thanksgiving Day, the factory became a hub of unintended activity. Boys as young as 9 climbed fences and walls, eager to join the rooftop crowd. Others dug beneath wooden barriers or paid workers to let them through. By kickoff, an estimated 500 to 1,000 people had crowded onto the metal roof. The elevated ventilator shaft, which provided a better view of the field, was particularly crowded, despite being the weakest part of the structure. Inside the factory, workers Clarence Jeter and Charles Yachts were acutely aware of the danger. As they monitored the furnaces, they could hear the groaning of the overloaded roof above. Both men knew the structure wasn't built to hold so much weight, especially over the furnace. They warned the crowd to climb down, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of the game. Frustrated and alarmed, they called the police for help, but no assistance came. Most officers were stationed at the game itself, managing the overflow crowd inside the stadium. The collapse happened without warning. Around 20 minutes into the game, a Stanford kicker lined up for a critical play. The spectators on the rooftop shifted en masse to get a better view. The corrugated iron roof groaned under the strain. Then came a crack, a sharp, echoing sound that signaled imminent disaster. In an instant, the roof gave way. Hundreds of men and boys plunged directly to the factory below. Some landed directly on the scalding hot furnace, their clothes igniting upon impact. Others struck searing hot pipes or fell onto the unforgiving brick floor, suffering broken bones and internal injuries. The scene was chaotic and horrifying. The factory filled with the sound of screams, the sharp smell of burning flesh, and the frantic shouts of workers trying to make sense of the disaster. Jeter and Yachts acted without hesitation. Using long iron tools, they began pulling victims off the furnace, tossing them onto the ground to extinguish the flames. The heat was so intense that both men burned their hands during the rescue effort. Despite the danger, they worked tirelessly, saving dozens of lives. Their bravery, in the face of unimaginable horror, was nothing short of heroic. Hey, if you're enjoying this fascinating deep dive into history, please click the like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell to support my channel and make sure you never miss a wild adventure or captivating tale from history. Across the street, the football game continued uninterrupted. When the roof collapsed, a man in the stands reportedly shouted, "It's a job," a slang term implying that the noise was a stage distraction. The crowd and players, unaware of the true nature of the disaster, returned their focus to the game. The sounds of cheering and the clash of athletes on the field drowned out the cries for help from the factory. This eerie detachment underscores the fragility of awareness. For those inside the stadium, the collapse was a distant, unverified event. For those inside the factory, it was a descent into hell. The aftermath of the collapse was chaotic. Police, firefighters, and bystanders rushed to the factory to assist with the rescue efforts. Improvised stretchers made from debris were used to carry victims out of the building. Wagons, carriages, and even horses became makeshift ambulances, transporting the injured to nearby hospitals. Hospitals across San Francisco quickly filled to capacity. Hallways, waiting rooms, and even outdoor spaces were converted into emergency treatment areas. Families flocked to the factory and hospitals, searching for their loved ones. The sight of parents desperately combing through the injured and deceased added a layer of heartbreak to this tragedy. Among the dead was 11-year-old William Eckfeldt. His father searched the factory for his missing son, recognizing William's small legs protruding from a pile of bodies. The boy's shocks were unmistakable. It was a moment of indescribable grief that symbolized the human cost of the disaster. In total, 23 people lost their lives, and more than 80 were injured. Many of the dead were boys and young men, their futures stolen in an instant. Survivors faced lifelong scars, both physical and emotional. For some, the wounds were visible: burns, fractures, and disfigurement. For others, the trauma lingered unseen. Jeter and Yachts, the workers who had risked their lives to save others, received little recognition. They returned to work the next day, their burned hands untreated. Their bravery was overshadowed by the larger tragedy and the city's swift return to normalcy. Despite its scale, the Thanksgiving Day disaster quickly faded from public memory. Newspapers covered the events for a few days, but by the following week, attention had shifted back to the big game and other news. The factory reopened and life in San Francisco resumed as though nothing had happened. So why was this disaster so easily forgotten? Perhaps it's because the victims were mostly working-class boys, individuals society often overlooked. Or perhaps the collective desire to focus on the holiday's joys made it easier to push the tragedy aside. Whatever the reason, the event became a footnote in history. The Thanksgiving Day disaster of 1900 is a stark reminder of the cost of negligence and the fragility of life. It challenges us to examine how society values or fails to value human lives. The lack of building codes, inadequate safety measures, and the indifference of those in power all contributed to the tragedy. Yet, amid the horror, there are moments of resilience and humanity. The courage of individuals like Jeter and Yachts show us the best of the human spirit. Their actions remind us that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. As we gather this Thanksgiving, let us remember the lives lost that day. Let us honor their memories by striving for a safer, more compassionate world, one where such tragedies are not just remembered, but prevented. If you enjoyed this video, please support me by clicking the like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit that notification bell. I'm your host, Evan Woodard. reminding that history isn't just in the past, it's waiting to be uncovered. I'll see you next time.